Have you ever noticed that the more time you spend organizing your work, the less work you actually accomplish? This is no coincidence, my friends. What I'm about to share with you today will challenge everything you thought you knew about productivity, organization, and success. Did you know that nearly 78% of successful entrepreneurs report that excessive organization actually hindered their progress in the early stages of building their empires? Yet millions continue to purchase planners, download productivity apps, and meticulously organize their workspace, wondering why they still can't seem to move forward with their most important work. I'm going to reveal the hidden relationship between overorganization and procrastination that's keeping you from achieving the success you desire. You'll learn why the conventional wisdom about getting organized is often the very trap that keeps the average person stuck in mediocrity, while the truly successful follow an entirely different approach. Before we continue, if you find this perspective valuable, make sure to subscribe to this channel. I share these unconventional truths about success that you won't hear from ordinary sources, and I'd hate for you to miss them. Let me ask you a question. How many times have you told yourself that you just need to get organized before you can start that important project? How many hours have you spent color-coding files, creating elaborate to-do lists, or rearranging your workspace? And most importantly, how often has all that organizing actually led to meaningful accomplishment? The harsh truth is that for most people, excessive organization has become the most sophisticated form of procrastination. It feels productive. It looks productive to others. It gives us the comforting illusion of progress. Yet at the end of the day, we've only prepared to do the work rather than actually doing it. I've studied the habits of over 500 successful men and women across America, and I've found that this problem is far more widespread than most realize. The average person spends nearly 2 hours each workday on what I call productive procrastination, activities that feel like work but produce no real results. That's 10 hours every week, 40 hours every month, an entire work week lost to the illusion of productivity. Consider the case of Thomas, a talented writer who came to me for advice. Thomas had spent 3 years organizing his notes, researching his topic, and creating detailed outlines for the book he wanted to write. He had the perfect writing desk, the ideal software, and an impeccable filing system. Yet after 3 years, he hadn't written a single chapter. His organizing had become an elaborate excuse to avoid the actual writing. Now contrast this with William, who started with nothing but a basic idea and a legal pad. Within 6 months, he had a completed manuscript. It wasn't perfect. No first draft ever is, but it was real. It existed. While Thomas was still organizing, William was negotiating with publishers. This pattern repeats itself across all fields of endeavor. The majority who fail spend their time preparing to act, while the minority who succeed simply begin acting, often before they feel fully prepared. This fundamental difference separates the achievers from the dreamers. The conventional wisdom tells us that organization leads to efficiency, which leads to productivity. But what I've observed through decades of studying successful individuals tells a different story. Overorganization often leads to paralysis, perfectionism, and procrastination. You see, the human mind craves certainty and control. Organization gives us the illusion of both. When we organize, we feel as though we're mastering our environment, reducing uncertainty, and increasing our chances of success. It activates the reward centers in our brain, giving us immediate satisfaction. But true achievement doesn't come from preparation alone. It comes from action, often imperfect action, taken consistently over time. And this is where most people falter. What I'm about to share with you isn't found in ordinary books on productivity or success. It's drawn from my extensive research and personal interviews with some of the most accomplished individuals of our time. These principles represent a fundamentally different approach to achievement, one that prioritizes progress over perfection, action over organization, and results over the appearance of productivity. The first principle I want to share is what I call imperfect initiation. The most successful individuals I've studied understand that beginning before you feel ready is often the only way to make meaningful progress. They recognize that the perfect moment, the perfect plan, and the perfect circumstance are all illusions that keep ordinary people stuck in preparation mode forever. Consider the story of Henry Ford. When Ford began working on his vision for the automobile, he didn't have a complete blueprint. He didn't wait until he had organized every detail of his manufacturing process. Instead, he began with what he had, where he was. He took imperfect action, learned from the results, and adjusted his course accordingly. Imagine if Ford had waited until he had the perfect organizational system in place before beginning. The automobile might have been invented by someone else, and his name might be lost to history. Instead, he understood that imperfect action beats perfect planning every single time. Think of achievement as being similar to jumping into a cold swimming pool. The person who stands at the edge, testing the water with their toe, thinking about the best way to enter, timing their jump perfectly, they suffer far more than the person who simply dives in without hesitation. The momentary shock is the same for both, but one endures a prolonged period of anticipation and anxiety while the other quickly adapts and begins swimming. Are you standing at the edge of your pool of opportunity, organizing your swimming techniques, or are you willing to dive in and adjust your stroke once you're in the water? The second principle is what I call strategic disorganization. This may sound counterintuitive, but the most productive individuals I've studied often maintain a level of disorganization. In certain areas of their work that would horrify productivity experts, Thomas Edison's laboratory was famously cluttered. Einstein's desk was notoriously messy. Steve Jobs wore the same style of clothing every day to avoid wasting mental energy on trivial decisions. These weren't signs of chaos or laziness, they were deliberate choices to conserve their organizational energy for where it truly mattered. You see, organization requires energy, mental, emotional, and even physical. And we all have a finite amount of this energy each day. The question isn't whether you should be organized, but rather where your organizational energy is best spent. I once visited the office of a highly successful business owner who had built a company worth millions. His desk was surprisingly cluttered, with papers scattered about and notes attached to various surfaces. When I commented on this, expecting him to be embarrassed, he smiled and said, "I organize the things that generate revenue. Everything else can wait." This man understood that organization should be a tool that serves your primary objectives, not an objective in itself. He directed his organizational energy toward the vital few activities that produced results, and allowed a degree of disorganization in areas that didn't directly contribute to his success. Think about your own work. Are you organizing the vital few activities that generate real results? Or are you spending your limited organizational energy on things that merely give the appearance of productivity? Imagine organization as being like water in a desert. The wise traveler uses their limited water supply only for drinking, the essential need that sustains life. The foolish traveler uses their water for washing their clothes, cleaning their equipment, and other non-essential activities. When the critical moment comes, they find themselves without the vital resource they need. Are you using your organizational energy wisely, or are you squandering it on activities that look productive but produce no meaningful results? The third principle is action precedes clarity. Many people believe they need complete clarity before they can begin. They want to see the entire path from start to finish before taking the first step. But what I've observed in successful individuals is quite different. For them, clarity comes through action, not before it. They understand that the path reveals itself only to those who are in motion. Consider the experience of writing. Many aspiring writers believe they need to have their entire book outlined, researched, and organized before they write the first word. Yet the most prolific and successful writers will tell you that the act of writing itself often reveals ideas, connections, and possibilities they never could have organized in advance. The same principle applies to business, relationships, and personal development. Action creates information. Action reveals opportunities. Action generates the clarity that sitting still never can. I recall speaking with a successful entrepreneur who told me, when I started my business, I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I needed to start somewhere. With each step I took, the next step became clearer. Had I waited until I could see the whole path, I would never have begun. Think of yourself as walking through a fog. Standing still, you can only see a few feet in any direction. But as you walk forward, new terrain constantly reveals itself. The fog never fully lifts, you never have complete clarity, but by moving forward, you can navigate successfully through territories that would be impossible to map in advance. Are you waiting for the fog to lift before taking your first step? Or are you brave enough to move forward with limited visibility, trusting that the path will reveal itself as you progress? Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, but Napoleon, without proper organization, won't I make mistakes? Won't I waste time and resources? Isn't planning essential to success? These are valid concerns, and I want to address them directly. Yes, you will make mistakes. In fact, you'll likely make more mistakes by taking action than you would by remaining in the planning phase. But these mistakes are not the enemies of success. They are essential components of it. Every error generates valuable information that no amount of planning could provide. As for wasting time and resources, consider how much time and energy is wasted in excessive preparation that never leads to action. The greatest waste isn't making mistakes. It's spending years organizing for a journey you never begin. And regarding planning, yes, planning has its place, but it should be minimal, focused, and rapidly followed by action. The most effective planning happens in cycles. Brief planning, followed by action, followed by assessment, followed by adjusted planning, and so on. This creates a dynamic growth process rather than a static organizational structure. I've found that the most successful individuals engage in just enough planning to identify their next step, not their next 100 steps. They organize just enough to enable immediate action, not perfect action. Have you ever noticed that some of the most organized people you know are not necessarily the most successful? They have immaculate desks, perfect filing systems, and detailed planners, yet they often accomplish less than their seemingly less organized counterparts. This is because organization, when it becomes an end in itself rather than a means to an end, is actually a sophisticated form of resistance. It's a way of avoiding the discomfort, uncertainty, and possibility of failure that comes with real achievement. Would you like to share in the comments what has resonated most with you so far? Your perspective might help others who are struggling with similar challenges. Now, let me share the fourth principle, which I call the minimum viable organization. This concept is simple but profound. Organize only what is absolutely necessary for your next meaningful action and not one thing more. When most people approach a new project or goal, they attempt to organize everything before beginning. They want to account for every possibility, prepare for every contingency, and create systems for every aspect of the work. This leads to organizational overwhelm and, ultimately, inaction. The successful individual, by contrast, identifies only the essential elements that must be organized to take the next significant step. Everything else remains fluid and adaptable. I once consulted with a company whose product development cycle had slowed to a crawl. When I examined their process, I discovered they were spending months organizing every aspect of new products before creating even a basic prototype. I advised them to identify only the minimum organization necessary to create a simple version of their product that could be tested with real customers. Within weeks, they had a basic prototype in the hands of actual users, generating valuable feedback that no amount of internal organizing could have provided. Within 6 months, they had doubled their product release rate and significantly improved customer satisfaction. Think of organization like packing for a journey. The novice traveler tries to anticipate every possible need and packs accordingly, resulting in heavy, unwieldy luggage that slows their progress. The experienced traveler packs only the essentials, knowing they can acquire or adapt to whatever else they might need along the way. Are you packing your organizational luggage too heavily? Are you trying to anticipate and organize for every contingency before taking your first step? The fifth principle is what I call productive momentum. This is the understanding that action creates energy, while excessive organization often depletes it. Have you ever noticed that once you actually begin a task you've been avoiding, you often find the energy to continue? Conversely, have you noticed how exhausted you feel after spending hours organizing without accomplishing anything concrete? This is because meaningful action creates psychological momentum. It generates a sense of progress that fuels further action. Organization, when it becomes excessive, actually consumes the very energy you need for achievement. Consider the experience of writing a book. The author who sits down and writes 500 words, however imperfect, often finds the energy and inspiration to write 500 more. The author who spends that same time organizing their writing environment, their research, or their outline often feels drained rather than energized. I witnessed this principle in action when I visited a manufacturing plant that had implemented a significant process change. Rather than spending months organizing the perfect transition, the leadership identified one production line where they could implement the change immediately. The success of this line created momentum that energized the entire organization. Within weeks, workers from other lines were voluntarily adopting the new methods, eager to share in the visible progress. Think of achievement as being like a flywheel. The initial push requires the most effort, but once it begins turning, each additional push becomes easier as momentum builds. Excessive organization is like applying the brakes to your flywheel, making each push more difficult than it needs to be. Are you using organization to build momentum, or are you allowing it to create friction that slows your progress? The sixth principle is organizational minimalism. This is the practice of deliberately reducing your organizational systems to their simplest possible form. In my studies of successful individuals, I've observed that they typically maintain simpler organizational systems than their less successful counterparts. They understand that complex systems require more maintenance, create more potential failure points, and consume more mental energy than simple ones. Consider the case of two salespeople I once observed. The first had an elaborate system of customer tracking, with color-coded files, detailed questionnaires, and multiple follow-up sequences. The second used a single notebook where he recorded essential information and next actions for each prospect. At the end of the year, the salesperson with the simpler system had outperformed his colleague by nearly 40%. When I asked him about his approach, he said, "I organize just enough to ensure I don't drop the ball. Everything else is just a distraction from actually talking to customers." Think of organizational systems as being like mechanical devices. The more moving parts they contain, the more maintenance they require, and the more likely they are to break down. The most reliable machines are often those with the fewest components. Are your organizational systems needlessly complex? Could you achieve the same or better results with simpler approaches? The seventh and final principle is what I call action-oriented identity. This is perhaps the most powerful concept I've observed in successful individuals. They don't see themselves as organized people, but rather as people who accomplish things. Your identity, how you see yourself, shapes your behavior more powerfully than any organizational system ever could. If you pride yourself on being well organized, you'll naturally spend time and energy maintaining that identity, even when it doesn't contribute to meaningful achievement. But if you pride yourself on being someone who consistently produces results, you'll naturally prioritize actions that lead to those results, using organization only as a means to that end. I once worked with a writer who struggled to complete his manuscripts. Despite having extensive organizational systems for his writing, he rarely finished his work. When we examined his thinking, we discovered that he saw himself primarily as a meticulous writer with high standards, rather than a writer who finishes books. Once he shifted his identity to emphasize completion over perfection, his behavior naturally changed. He began to see excessive organization as a threat to his new identity rather than a support for it. Within 9 months, he had completed more work than in the previous 3 years combined. Think about how you describe yourself. Do you take pride in your organizational systems, or in what those systems help you accomplish? Do you derive satisfaction from having a perfectly organized desk, or from the work you complete at that desk? Now, let's explore how these 7 principles work together as an integrated system for achievement. Imagine achievement as a river flowing toward your desired outcome. Traditional approaches to organization are like building elaborate dams and channels to control every aspect of the river's flow. While this seems logical, it often results in stagnant pools rather than powerful forward movement. The approach I'm advocating is different. Rather than trying to control every aspect of the flow, you identify the natural direction of the river and remove the primary obstacles in its path. You use minimal structures to guide the flow rather than control it, allowing momentum and natural forces to carry you toward your goal. This begins with imperfect initiation, jumping into the river before you feel completely ready. It continues with strategic disorganization, focusing your organizational energy only where it truly matters. It accelerates with the understanding that action precedes clarity, that the path reveals itself as you move forward. You maintain momentum by practicing minimum viable organization, organizing only what's necessary for your next meaningful step. You generate energy through productive momentum, using the energy created by action to fuel further action. You reduce friction through organizational minimalism, keeping your systems as simple as possible. And you sustain all of this with an action-oriented identity, seeing yourself as someone who values accomplishment over organization. This integrated approach creates a self-reinforcing system that naturally leads to greater achievement with less organizational overhead. It's not about abandoning organization entirely, it's about putting it in its proper place as a servant to action rather than a substitute for it. So how do you begin implementing these principles in your own life and work? Let me offer a simple plan of action. First, identify one important project or goal that you've been organizing but not actually working on. Commit to taking one meaningful action on this project today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but today. Make this action small enough to be doable but significant enough to generate real progress. Second, examine your current organizational systems and ask which ones are truly serving your primary objectives. Be ruthless in simplifying or eliminating those that consume more energy than they generate. Remember, the goal is not to be organized. The goal is to achieve your meaningful objectives. Third, begin practicing just-in-time organization, organizing only what you need for your next significant action, and only when you need it. Resist the temptation to organize parts of your work that you won't be addressing in the immediate future. Fourth, at the end of each day, ask yourself, did I organize today, or did I accomplish? Make sure that your answer increasingly favors accomplishment over organization. And finally, begin shifting your identity from someone who values organization to someone who values achievement. When you feel the urge to organize beyond what's necessary, remind yourself, I am a person who gets things done, not just a person who gets things ready. My friends, we stand at a critical juncture in our understanding of productivity and success. For too long, we've been told that organization is the path to achievement, when in reality, excessive organization is often the very thing preventing us from achieving what matters most. The path forward is clear, though it may not be comfortable. It requires us to embrace the uncertainty that comes with action, to value progress over perfection, and to use organization as a tool rather than a crutch. The world doesn't reward those who have the most organized plans. It rewards those who take consistent action toward meaningful goals. It doesn't celebrate those with perfect filing systems. It celebrates those who create, build, and accomplish things of value. The question is not whether you are organized enough. The question is whether you are accomplishing what matters most to you. Every day that passes is one you'll never get back. Every hour spent organizing beyond what's necessary is an hour not spent creating the life and work you desire. The time for excessive preparation is over. The time for meaningful action is now. Don't wait until you feel completely ready. Don't wait until your plan is perfect. Don't wait until the uncertainty is gone. Begin now with what you have, where you are. Remember, the more you organize, the more procrastination perfects itself. Break this cycle today. Take one meaningful action before this day ends, and then another tomorrow, and another the day after that. This is how achievement happens, not through perfect organization, but through consistent, imperfect action taken over time. If this message has resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment, sharing what you've learned and what action you commit to taking today. Your example might be the very inspiration someone else needs to move from organization to achievement. The world is waiting for what only you can create. Don't keep it waiting any longer.